Welcome to the Pathfinder Legacy Podcast, where we help farmers, ranchers, and business owners create a seamless transition plan for the future. From retirement to ownership transfer, we protect what you've built and guide you every step of the way.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Pathfinder Legacy Podcast. I'm your host, Heidi, and today I have another special guest that I'm sitting down with. I am visiting with one of my local neighbors, and there's some family history that goes back to my side of the family, where I actually on my mom's side from family members and how the relationship is and how they homesteaded here and what the trials and tribulations that they went through when they homesteaded. So I'm sitting here with Tom Froehlich. Tom, welcome.
Yes.
All right. So we're happy to have you on today, really from my folks where they are and compared to where you are we about 5 miles apart the way the crow flies?
There's the crow flying here.
Yeah, we're about 5 miles apart. So I really want to dig into, I really wish we would have had some of these stories recorded from our grandparents and so forth and growing up, and we didn't have some of that family history. So I thought it would be really fun to sit down with you, and you've done a lot of work. You've got some interesting things that we're going to talk about as we get further into the conversation. But why don't you talk about starting way back from the beginning, dialing back to your grandparents and how they homesteaded here? And actually, was it your great grandpa, Frank Froehlich?
Well, Frank didn't homestead here. It was Joseph Froehlich homesteaded the place that I'm on.
Okay, so Joseph is your grandpa.
Joseph is my grandpa, and Frank was his dad.
Okay.
But Frank and Elizabeth came from Russia.
Okay.
After they were getting stuck into the military in Russia, and they were guaranteed not to ever do that. So they just, I don't know if they snuck out of Russia or how they got out of there, but they wound up. You can read stories that tells you how long it took them to get from where they were to where the ship was waiting for them. And evidently there were some people left before them that wrote back to them and told them how good it was over here. And this is where they all decided to go. In all our countries over there, I don't care if they were Germans or Bohemians or Scandinavians or whoever, they were all on the run, and they were all coming to the United States because then they heard of the free land over here through homesteading, and they all wanted this free land, which they couldn't get anywhere else.
And before we started recording today, you were telling me how they initially were trying to run from not having, I don't want to say run, or because it was getting harder and harder for them to farm where they were because families were bigger and land was getting distributed to them in smaller portions. So it was harder to raise a family.
Originally they got probably 80 acres. Then they had a couple boys, and they split that up, and pretty soon it was down to 3-4 acres in the family, and they couldn't survive on that. And then it was communism then, just like it is today, and the government came in and they took whatever wheat or grain or cattle they had. They took most of them and hardly left them anything to live on. So they just had enough of that, and they had to get out of there.
Right. So then they came over to Ellis Island, and when they came in, was there initially when they were in Russian, was their name Froehlich at the time, or did they make any changes at Ellis Island?
The Froehlichs, we didn't change, or they didn't change the Froehlich name. Some of them took an H out of it, and some of them spelled it a little different, but a lot of them spelled their name different at Ellis Island for fear that Russia was going to come after them. So they changed their names, spelled it different, so they figured the Russian army or Russians couldn't catch them. But it was, I don't know, kind of like what we're going through today at the border. Same thing, but I think I read one time not too long ago where there was like 15 million people from that European area that came to this country. That's just about as bad as it is today.
Right. Coming in and trying to get away from their government.
But they came to this area and they lived here until the dirty 30s. And then if you start reading in books, a lot of those people went out to Washington State, Oregon, California. They all migrated to the West Coast because they were starving here. And it was the land of plenty when they came. But after droughts and grasshoppers and hailstorms, and they couldn't survive here.
Right.
Not on 160 acres.
Right.
Some of this land, you couldn't even live on it today. It's that bad.
It wasn't the highly fertile ground that they were used to when they were in the Ukraine or in Russia. So then when they came here, whether it was by train or they took the train as far as they could in South Dakota and then came up on a wagon train.
Wagons and horse and wagons.
And staked their claims. Talk about, you were mentioning earlier when they first came, they could get 160 acres. And you were talking about that a little bit earlier. How did that work?
For what I understand, there was a place in Dickinson. I don't know if it was courthouse or whatever, but you could get a permit or whatever for 160 acres. And I guess they tell you where it was at and how these people founded this 160 acres out here in this country with no roads and no markers or anything to go by. They'd come out and they'd claim it, put their claim on it. They'd have to go back they'd have to sit on that at one time it was three years, and then now I'm reading it was 5 years. They had to put a house on it and live there for 5 years. But the first houses were either tar paper shacks. They usually made a tar paper shack before they plowed enough sod to make a sod house. Mm-hmm. And then they had a sod house, and they lived in that probably 10 by 10 sod house until they pulled enough, in this area, they pulled enough rocks together to make a rock house.
Okay.
Because in this area, it was rock houses with sandstone. And if you went to the Sheffield area, it was prairie stone, what we call flint rocks. And those flint rock houses some are still standing today just perfect because those rocks didn't fall apart like the sandstone houses.
Sure.
And they were made with very little mud in the rock houses, where the sandstone houses, all the rocks were laid in mud and some of them put straw in it. Some of them had flax straw, while the flax straw ones lasted forever.
Sure. Yeah.
Because flax straw don't deteriorate.
It doesn't break down.
So that made a super good house.
You also mentioned how they had the mud. How did they get the mud?
The mud. I guess they put the house on the spot where the mud, the clay was the best. And they took the youngest kid in the family, and they put him on the oldest horse they had. And then in the biggest room in the house, they would let this kid ride this horse around, and they dump water in the middle of the room, and this horse would mix the mud up. Okay. And that's how they got the mud out of the middle of the house. So how they did, I'm sure they weren't rubber gloves. I don't know how these people could work in mud without their hands chapping up. Nobody ever told me that story. If they greased them up or whatever they did, because you can't work in mud very long and your hands are all chapped up.
Right.
So the mud came out of the center of the house. In the houses I've seen, they looked like they were trying to make a basement. But actually they were taking the mud out of there.
They were taking the mud. Did they put anything in the middle of those houses then, or they just let them have that depression?
There was a depression there because all these houses had hardwood floors in them. Because this house that I worked on, it had floor joists with hardwood flooring there.
Okay. So then they built over the top of that.
Yes.
So it was almost like a crawl space that ended up.
Well, it could have been a crawl space, but there was no door to go down there.
Yeah.
I suppose that probably filled with mice and whatever else.
Sure. They just built over the top of it.
I'm sure it was mice because when I redid it, I filled it back up, that indentation.
Okay.
And I put cement over it so I would never get mice in there.
So you're not going to. So we're going to get to that part in a bit. But what Tom is talking about is a house that your grandparents came and homesteaded, and you have done a lot of work on that house. Before we get into more stories on that, let's back up a bit. So when they homesteaded here, they were first in a tar paper house. What did your
tar paper shacks?
A tar paper shack. And then
it was just a wood frame with tar paper on it. That's what some of them dug holes in the side of a hill and lived in the cave. I know of a family that a wagon box, I don't know if you know how big a wagon box is, an old wagon box. They came and it was too cold to pull rocks and to build anything. They took the wagon box off, flipped the wagon box over, and a mother and father and a child lived in that wagon box all winter. Can you imagine?
No.
And it's only probably 3 feet wide and 8 feet long. That's what they lived in for the first winter.
Wow. That's really making the best out of what you had to have some shelter.
And that was up in the Norwegian country. And your dad and I farmed that land up there. And this guy told us that story.
Okay.
That's how his parents lived over winter.
Yeah.
I don't know what they did with their horses or whatever, but
right.
That had to be something else.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
With a baby.
And how do you raise a family? You're basically crawling on your hands and knees in there. Yeah. So when they first had this tar paper house, what was one of the first things that your grandparents would have done when they homesteaded here? They got the land going.
I never did ever hear of what they had for furniture or anything like that when they started. I've read where this one family had a wash tub and they tipped the wash tub upside down and they used that for their table for 3 years.
Okay.
Could you imagine? That's how bad. There were no chairs, there was no furniture, no nothing. And they just had a wash tub.
Yep. And basically just living raw off the land and with whatever resources they had, because they didn't have the money. They didn't have maybe the skills to build things at that time, or they're trying to work the land too and make a living with the free land that they were getting to.
They lived off of the land, and I don't know what they could have ate. They sure as heck didn't eat hay or grass.
No.
But they ate something.
Until they worked it.
The money, I don't know. Nobody ever talked about money whenever they had money, because they had to have some money to come here and buy a wagon and a horse and whatever else to eat. But Bernetta's grandfather told me that after they were here the first year, if they could have afforded it, they'd have went back to Russia. That's how bad it was here in comparison to where they came from.
Right. So
those people went through more hell than we'll ever dream of going through.
And the things that we take for granted.
Well, right now, what do they say? Roughing it is a house without 3 bathrooms in it.
Right.
That's what they call roughing it today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Our children, your grandchildren, won't know what it was like to have to live that way and to deal with those, not having the modern conveniences or having heat, a house with more than one bedroom.
What's so sad is a lot of these homesteads in the last 10 years got pushed down and hauled away. And some of those homesteads, some of those houses were in decent shape yet. and they just hauled them away. Nobody ever had left any history or.
Yep. And if you don't record that history, it doesn't take much and it's gone within a blink. And you don't have that preservation of where our ancestors came from when they settled.
90% of it is gone. And as for us, I don't know why we kept a bunch of these old history books, so we can go back and kind of look it up a little bit where they came from.
Right.
But if you read the stories where these people, in Russia was really bad because they had wolves over there. And if these people go out in the open, the wolves would attack them. And they didn't have guns because they couldn't have guns in Russia. So those people went through a living hell. And that's probably why they wanted out of there real bad.
And then they come here to the States and work on homesteading, settling, finding their place. They're really having to learn how to persevere and get through the hard winters and make a living.
And one time, I don't know where I read it in one of these books, 50% of those people died that were on the way over here. 50% of them died in ships or trying to get onto the ships or going across Russia, trying to get out of there. 50% died then. And when they came over here, another 20, 30% of them died over here just from starvation and rough times. And the big thing around in this country when they came here were prairie fires. Prairie fires were a big, big thing because the whole country was grass. Everything was grass, and it was just like gas.
So is that why most of the houses, when they initially were using rock? Is that why they were doing?
No, rock was the only thing they had. Lumber was scarce. Rock was one of the few things they had to build with. Mm-hmm. And being from that country, somebody knew how to lay rocks and do a good job with rocks. Because when you looked at some of those houses today, the walls are perfect straight. The corners are perfect straight. I don't know how I've tried to lay rocks and I can't do it like that.
Yeah. How they had that.
They had the skill and they knew how to break rocks to make them straight. And to this day, I've never found anybody that knows how to break a rock to make it straight.
To break those rocks and keep them to build.
The people that quarried those rocks were unbelievable good.
Well, and those rocks had to be good for something, as the frost would bring them up more and more and try to be able to farm and get them out of the way. So they built buildings.
But this is the thing that's wrecked a lot of those rock houses was the moisture would get in between those rocks and they'd freeze and then they'd split or they'd break the walls.
Okay.
So if the roof started leaking on the gable ends or on the bottoms, the house was a matter of time. It was gone. That's just like this house I restored. It was, as you see in pictures of it, it was nothing left of it.
No, a lot of it had crumbled.
It all crumbled away. I shoveled all kinds of dirt out of there that was between the rocks.
Right.
Because it just crumbled. And gumbo, when it dries out, it crumbles.
Yes. And in this area, there is a lot of gumbo.
That's all it is, gumbo country. You go south there a mile and you start getting into good land. And then you go north here, it's sand row. And this right in between here we always wondered why our grandparents would have homesteaded in the gumbo country, Well, the neighbor across the road here, he told me, he said his dad came from, I don't know, he was a Bohemian, or Czech, so I don't know where they came from, but he said when he came to this country, he was going to make sure he was never going to get in sand country. He wanted gumbo. Because he knew the gumbo lasted, and when it got dry, you had a crop. Right. Sand ground, you had nothing.
No, it all dries out. Yeah. Well, they made their way. They figured out how to farm in the gumbo ground. So your grandparents, when they homesteaded, they were farmers and ranchers.
Well, they all had to have a couple cows. They all had to have horses. So I don't know if you call them farmers or ranchers or whatever they were. They were kind of a mixed breed. They all had to have their chickens and their ducks and whatever else to survive.
What we call their old McDonald farm
Yes.
with having, so that way they had meat and
Yeah.
produce,
They all had to have
dairy.
pigs, so they could butcher pigs. You know, that was kind of a cheap way of raising food was with pigs because they could let them run.
Yep. And pigs will eat,
They eat anything and everything.
Yep. They're kind of the scroungers.
Yeah. So it was, I guess, so the more wealthier people had bigger, or they wound up buying some of these homesteads out. And they got to be bigger farmers, and then they just farmed.
Maybe didn't have the livestock as much. They
didn't.
Focused more on farming.
As you go up in that Dagenham country, that was the Norwegians. They had a different idea
on how they farm. So your grandparents, did they shift gears more towards farming, or did they have a mix of both livestock and farming?
It was mostly farming.
Okay.
Because Grandpa Froehlich and Grandma, I understood, sat down and they decided that the horses were eating them out of house and home for what they were getting out of them. So they bought tractor and farm machinery. Maybe some of the first tractors in the area, besides the old steam engines that some of them broke the land up with steam engines.
Okay. So then they sold horses, they sold off their horses, and then they started buying the first form of tractors and equipment.
They started out with a small tractor, probably the size that I've got sitting over across the road. But they had a tractor and I suppose it was probably a 2-bottom plow and a cultivator and a drill. That's what they used. I don't know who did the thrashing or who owned the thrashing machine. Never did ever hear that. But later, in the later 30s or early 40s, my dad had a thrashing machine that he would go around the neighborhood and thrash.
Okay.
Thrash for neighbors.
And they would work together.
Well, for the records I found on that was my dad thrashed for so many cents a bushel. Because the thrashing machine had a bushel counter on it.
Oh.
And I think he was thrashing at that time for 3 cents a bushel. And the records I found, he was hiring the guys to haul the bundles. So how much help he got out of the neighbors, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But it was I remember my dad hiring what they would call bums. They'd ride the trains. It was kind of interesting because these bums, I can remember that. They'd be sitting by the depot in Dickinson. There'd be about 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 of them. The freight train came in and these bums were riding in the cars. And then the railroad would check the cars out and throw them off. And then they were sitting out there waiting for people to pick them up, take them home. And my dad always had 2 of them during the thrashing time.
Okay.
And I remember one of them's name was Tex. I'll never forget that. This had to be in the early 50s or late 50s, early 50s, because he'd put them upstairs in his house. They'd put them upstairs, put them to bed, and lock the doors.
Oh, I was going to say, how did you deal with the safety?
They locked the doors and lock them up there.
Okay.
But that was the last of them that I ever remember.
Okay. Were they good workers? Did they get the job done?
Yeah, I guess they got the work done.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
they were out.
Like the big place across the hill over here, they were sheep people, and he probably had 5, 6, 8 of them all at one time.
Okay.
Herding sheep, but he ran a lot of sheep.
So there were a lot of that, ways to get some of that labor, put them to work. Yeah.
Well, there were a lot of the guys. I mean, when they start starving here, they would start working out and working for either the railroad or coal mines or whatever, because there was a big coal mine at Dickinson, that underground mine that there were a lot of guys worked there up until the late 70s. They worked in this coal mine.
Your grandparents farmed, and with your dad farming, but your dad would have learned the trade and the farming from. Was your dad the only one of the kids that farmed?
My dad had a brother that he was the oldest one, I guess, and he bought a farm by Belfield. And my dad's other brothers didn't want nothing to do with farming because they were always broke and they didn't have any money, and
They saw the challenges.
They went to work, and then my youngest uncle got drafted in World War II. So he wound up somewhere in Europe. And then when he came back, he didn't come back to the farm either.
Okay.
He got the taste of the world.
Yep.
And they found out this was next to living in hell.
Right. That they didn't want to come back and have to work that hard.
Well, work that hard for nothing.
And not get paid for
free. That's a big deal. It's same way today.
So you were telling me a story earlier about your grandpa, and your grandma and grandpa had how many children? There was
8 of them.
8, and 2 of them passed away
from the 1918 flu,
the Spanish
flu. It hit a lot of people in the area, and for what I've been told about it, you could be perfectly healthy, and 3 hours later you could be dead or bleed to death. It was unbelievable. My uncle, I was told, came down from the upstairs in the house from bed one morning, and he said he didn't feel good. And he told my grandmother he didn't feel good, and by night he was dead. But that's how fast it went around. And some of those old people had a cure for it, figured out a cure, and some of them some of them died before they ever figured out anything. Mm-hmm. But my grandmother saved, 6 or 8 of those kids. She saved them with what she gave them, and we don't know. But my grandmother made what we call a salve. It was in a jar. She always had it in a jar, and I remember it being black. And that was supposed to be the cure for everything. And when she moved to Dickinson, she had it down in her basement. I remember this black jar set. And I asked, after she died, the salve idea went with her. Nobody ever knew what she used to make it. Nobody had a clue. None of her kids knew what was in that thing.
Okay.
But it was out of the herbs that she was picking off the pasture lands around here. But I know one thing she had in her basement was camellia tea.
Okay.
Had her a camellia tea?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That was supposed to be cure-all for everything. And we've got it growing right behind our house here. And we mow it off. Every week we mow it off. And when you mow it, you can smell it. It's camellia tea. And you go to a health food store, you buy it.
Yeah, you pay good money for it.
It's just like today you can buy the big thing I've been reading now is wormwood. You know what wormwood is? Your dad's got it over at his farm, mother over there, big time. It's supposed to be one of the better cures for anything. Mm-hmm. Wormwood root.
Wormwood root. I have to remember that. See what kind of witch doctoring we can do.
Yeah.
So the camille tea that your grandma would use, or she had made her own medicine to help save her family.
We don't know what she used. Those old people wouldn't tell the secrets.
Right. So she raised how your grandpa was talk about the story about your grandpa.
Well, he was building this place up, and he went to Dickinson. Him and two of his sons went to Dickinson for lumber for building this shed down here. That was our machine shed. In 24, there was a big storm in August, I guess. I think it was sometime in August. Some big storm came through, and there was a tornado, and it went through Dickinson. And he was in the lumber yard, and I've got two different stories on how he got killed, but one of them, the last story I heard was there was a bunk of lumber that tipped over and tipped on him and killed him and another guy. And the two sons were there, but they never said, I've never ever heard a story about him coming back home and telling Grandma that Dad got killed in this tornado. But they had the funeral was in a house over there. They had the funeral there. They had a 3-day wake, I think it was. And that was supposed to be kind of a gruesome thing because they didn't embalm anybody then. And from there, they took him to Sheffield and they buried him. But my grandmother was supposed to have been one of the happy-go-lucky women in the country. And after he died, somebody told me she never ever smiled.
Probably not.
That's what I heard, that she never ever smiled after that. And I don't ever remember her smiling, except for this picture. I don't know how come she was smiling on this picture. What they said to her, we don't know.
They got her to smile there.
They got her to smile there.
Well, and after losing your husband and trying to raise 6 children on her own
And farm.
So she kept the farm going even after losing her husband.
And bought land after that.
Bought land.
And after everybody was losing theirs, she was buying land. And we don't know how she ever survived or what. But I was told she was supposed to be a very good farmer.
Okay. So talk more about that, what she was doing with the farming. She was buying land and she was using tractors at that time?
Well, and after he died, she was back to horses. But one old guy up the road here told me that they were buying seed wheat from her. One farmer down the road here was buying straw from her to feed his horses so they could get his crop planted, but he was feeding his horses straw, and she had the straw and the grain. So we don't know, other than one fell up the road told me here she had a hoe drill. She hoed her crop in. Everybody else had disc drills. And evidently he said that hoe drill made her a crop every year where nobody else could raise a crop in this country, in this gumbo.
Right. Maybe you got the seed bedded in better.
Yes, that's what he figured, that she got the seed down in it. But she did tell my dad, and my dad told me that when you buy seed, make sure it's the best quality seed and none of this scrub grain. And that's what a lot of guys evidently were using, were probably 40, 50 pound grain. And she was having to have 60 pound grain for seed.
Right.
That's how she survived.
She had better quality seed, so she was having production or seeing some profit from that. But then she was also an entrepreneur at that time, finding ways to make more money with selling straw.
She evidently had something going for her that nobody else figured out. And then I suppose a lot of I'm just kind of guessing now that I think about it, a lot of the guys were making moonshine and drinking, and she wasn't drinking. She was saving her money. Probably guess maybe that's why a lot of it was going like that.
Why she was safe. How that?
She never, I guess she wasn't into alcohol like probably the old farmer, the guys were. Never thought of that.
That's probably what was happening. She wasn't in the evenings going into town with the men's club or what have you, having drinks. She was at home figuring out how she was going to survive and raise her family.
But one thing she did, and when she was in a nursing home at the end, she was against welfare. She was totally against any handouts and welfare. And when she was in the nursing home, one of the neighbor ladies, her age, was at the nursing home, getting the same care she was. And boy, if that ever irked her, I mean, there was no smiling when she mentioned that. She said, so-and-so is getting better, they're just as good at care as I am, and they were on welfare all their life, and I'm paying my way. So that really bugged her. But I guess she was no welfare recipient or whatever. That she never ran after welfare like a lot of the other people did.
Yeah. So she figured out ways that she wasn't going to be dependent upon the government and getting any handouts. She was going to continue to work hard with what she knew. And she had a set of values that was their standards that this is.
Yeah. Like we have there's a place 2 mile or a mile and a half north here. These people hit a pretty good, nice setup there. And they went into Dickinson to buy groceries probably once a week. And I was told that they'd sit in there, they'd be eating their groceries in there and taking groceries. And this guy the grocer was giving them credit. And little did they know that he was writing this all down.
Oh. So did they get a big bill at the end?
No, he got their land.
Oh.
The bill was big enough that he just took it to the courthouse and turned it in, and he wound up with their land. Mm-hmm. And they had 3/4 of land, and he wound up with it. The grocer, no one say his name, but after he got the land, he rented it out to a couple different people. And then after I was a senior in high school, he rented this 3/4 of land to me. Okay. And I had it for many years.
Yeah.
But it was land that he got from those people eating his groceries.
Somebody not paying their bill. Yeah. Did you know that story at the time when you were renting that land? You knew how he...
Oh, yeah, I knew how he got it. He wasn't afraid to tell me either.
I find those stories very interesting to see how if you weren't able to pay your bill, well, then we were going to barter on something else.
Yeah.
If you can't pay your bill, then let's see what we can do to be able to make up.
Well, I guess he was writing down all the groceries they were eating and adding them up, and they didn't know this.
Well, they got they were
eating really cheap and figuring this guy was an angel.
Yeah.
You know, he was supposed to be a really nice guy because he was giving them groceries, but they didn't know this nice guy shit ended.
That's right. Yep. At the end, you're never going to.
Yeah.
The nice guy was going to make sure that he got paid for his fruits of his labor.
That was kind of the story that he told me about it, you know, and everybody else knew about it.
All right, listeners. And that right there is where we're going to pause for today. Because on the surface, this looked like generosity, it looked like kindness, and it looked like someone stepping in to help. But underneath it, there were expectations, there were assumptions, and there was a price to pay. And that's what makes succession planning so tricky. The story everyone tells and the story everyone else already knows. In part 2 of my conversation with Tom, we're going to dig into what happens when those unspoken expectations finally surface. When the nice guy wants to get paid, and when families realize that good intentions don't replace clear arguments. At the end of the day, if it's not written down, talked through, and understood by everyone, it's just a ticking time bomb with a friendly face. Until next time, I'll see you between the ditches.
Thanks for listening to the Pathfinder Legacy Podcast, where your future is our focus. Be sure to subscribe, follow us on social media, and visit us at pathfinderlegacy.com to start building your transition plan today.